Greetings collectors and welcome to today's retro game review. Today we're travelling back to 1986 to look at Ghosts and Goblins for the Commodore 64. Capcom's 1985 arcade hit was always destined for greatness. It's the classic story of knight falls in love with the princess is captured by a demon, hero must fight his way through hordes of ghosts and goblins to rescue the princess. Think Super Mario, if it was programmed by Clive Barker. The game found home releases on Nintendo Entertainment System, PlayStation, Sega Saturn, Game Boy Color and many other home consoles, but today we're going back to one of the earlier releases, and that's on the Commodore 64. The game actually saw various releases on the Commodore 64, including a hard to find floppy disk edition. It's more common though that you see the cassette editions. The cassette edition itself had multiple variants as it moved from first release to the budget range. Today we're looking at the original black box release of the game. Over time, this case format fell out of favour as it was more expensive to produce than the standard cassette tape case. They do however have that distinctive retro chic feel about them. The artwork for the game is fairly decent. It's clearly Sir Arthur versus the demon in an action sequence, exactly what you want from a front game cover. I have to say that the back of the box is not quite so interesting, but it does get the job done. Inside we find the cassette and the inner cover that also acts as the instruction manual. It's short and to the point and is something to keep you busy whilst it takes the cassette time to boot up. As mentioned, the gameplay revolves around Sir Arthur rescuing the princess. This takes the form of a side-scroller. You begin your quest with 5 lives and a standard lance for throwing at the enemies. The enemies come in a multitude of varieties, including zombies, vultures, man-eating plants, ogres, and of course, ghosts and goblins. There are inevitably many changes from the original arcade game. Changes to the enemy design, as well as the order of some of the levels has been changed. Overall, the original feel of Ghosts and Goblins is here in this game, so I actually think this was quite a successful conversion from that perspective. The controls are a simple affair. It's the classic up, down, left, right, jump and attack layout, and this works quite well for the most part. Throughout the levels there are shield, weapon and armour pickups. I highly recommend gathering these. You will encounter numerous enemies and must dispatch them quickly whilst trying not to take damage yourself. For this episode I've had to resort to an invincibility cheat. There was just no other way of showing off the game levels. In terms of difficulty, Ghosts and Goblins is a clear 10 out of 10. I've heard it said that the NES version of the game is the most difficult. For my money though, I'd nominate the Commodore 64 version any day of the week. Jumping onto platforms is near impossible at times, there never seems to be enough dexterity to avoid the barrage of on-screen enemies. Some enemies will track you whilst others will downright spawn on top of you. At times the difficulty level just seems, well, unfair. The graphics for the Commodore 64 are actually quite pleasing. Don't expect all of the bells and whistles of today's consoles, but there is very solid presentation here. The scrolling is smooth and the boss fights have decent sized sprites. In terms of sound, there is only one audio track, but what is here is excellent. It's repetitive, dark and full of interesting sound. It puts me in mind of the BBC Phonographic Workshop. The music was certainly crafted for the Commodore 64 capabilities and is fantastically memorable. I have a feeling that my criticisms of the game are fairly much the same as everyone else's experiences. That is that the game is punishingly difficult. Those one-hit kills can be very unforgiving and ultimately very frustrating. Even level 1 is a good challenge. It's easy to see other YouTube videos of players completing the game within 6 minutes and making the experience look easy. The truth is though that you really need an auto-fire pad and memories of all the attack patterns to survive this game. I also suspect that some of these gamers are using tool assists for their runs. To be honest though, for many this is going to be the only way you'll ever see that end game screen. Although Ghosts and Goblins really is a great game, it's such a shame that the difficulty level was so high. Don't get me wrong, I actually enjoy difficult retro games. It's just that in the case of Ghosts and Goblins, the level is so difficult, it's hard to remember all of the attack patterns and then try and progress to the next level. The overall difficulty doesn't make it a bad game, it just makes it an inaccessible game for most. It's this aspect that is the true downfall of the game. Overall though, I would still defend that this is a great game for the Commodore 64. Difficult but full of character. After all, I actually enjoy the challenge of many of these older games. Sometimes it's much more rewarding than just breezing through a game. There are only a handful of stages, but you'll certainly not finish this on your first playthrough. When it comes to collector's prices, the market has settled in recent years. The larger black box edition is the more desirable Commodore 64 release. Expect to pay around the £10 mark unless you can get it in a bundle of other tapes. For the US, that's anywhere up to around $15, but I expect on the right day there's still bargains to be had as collectors clear out their old stock. I have seen this version sell for over the $20 mark, though on auction sites there's clearly still a demand for the original and a competitive nature of bidders is likely to drive up the price online. This is a case where you may be best off going to local traders and collectors willing to trade. For the budget release of a standard cassette case, anywhere up to £3 or $5 is acceptable. Again, I dare say that you could actually halve this price by buying in a mixed lot. So, is the game worth it? Well, in short, yes. My final verdict is that this is a game that is a must if you're a Commodore 64 collector. It's an early Capcom title, a game that left a legacy, and also a game that holds up well after all these years. If you can see past the difficulty level, you may actually enjoy this title. From a nostalgia perspective, it's a really nice piece to have in the collection without breaking the bank. From a gaming perspective, it's a really good challenge that's paved the way for later high difficulty side-scrollers. Ghosts and Goblins for the Commodore 64 is flawed and it is dated, but it is most certainly a classic. Hello again, I hope you enjoyed today's show and thank you for the view. Remember, you can always comment, like, subscribe and find us on the social media sites below. Happy collecting!